Welcome to our 24th podcast. Today we'll be talking about communication theory, what it is, why it matters, and practical tips to be a better communicator. And what's one thing you can do now to be a better communicator? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplace listeners. My name is Rich Cruz. I'm an organizational development consultant, and welcome to our podcast. We're so glad that you were with us today. I'm joined by my co-host here, Ben Kleinman. Hi, Ben.
Hey, everyone.
And Cheryl Volpe.
Hey, Rich.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hey, Ben. Hi, everyone.
And we have been talking about a bunch of different things. I mean, this is our 24th podcast, right? So, for us, it's, we've been covering organizational culture, organizational change, just industrial organizational psychology, organizational development, all different kinds of things. But one topic that keeps coming up, and it's something that we as people, as social creatures, we need to really get a handle on, and that is communication, right? So we thought we would bring today a little bit of theory, from the psychology standpoint, and I guess maybe where we will start is literally looking at the American Psychological Association, or APA. So there we go. We've got our first acronym of the day.
Glad we got that out of the way. All right.
Early, moving on, but it will be early and often, just like voting in Chicago. So we got so communication theory is defined as the theoretical treatment of the interchange of signs and signals that constitutes communication, and it's the branch of science concerned with all aspects, technical, physiological, psychological, and social, of the storage and transmission of information. I think that all aligns very well with what we can talk about in the workplace. Yeah.
Very common sense. Mm-hmm. Very common sense approach. Makes clear sense.
And before we get too deep into it, Rich, maybe we could try to bring that into layman's language a little bit. And Cheryl, you had some good kind of pop culture references to games of children play and things like that. So maybe we could kind of wrap that in a different way so everyone can understand it. And then, or at least so I can understand it, because that was a lot of very fancy scientific words. And then we can all be on the same page and dig into it.
Sure.
Well, I mean, when we look at signs and signals, right? So we've got communication that is visual. We've got communication that is oral, right? Audible. We have communication that's felt, mm-hmm. So it's all of it. It is sensory, but it is these things, these behaviors, these artifacts that we have that allow us to transmit information to each other, which we've been doing since, frankly, before we were born, so mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's in our nature.
Right. And when you think about children's games, Ben, I mean, it's such a funny thing that we just break into that game of telephone. See a group of kids who talk about that game of telephone. And when you look at it scientifically or epistemologically, the way we are right now as a theory or an approach, that simple game says everything that we're about to say in the next half hour, right? It's about interpretation. And in that game, you see, it's fun to see how does this one phrase become reinterpreted by a group of people to be something completely different at the end if you're not careful, right? If it's not planned or said with intention and clarity.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something that, Ben from episode 1 being crystal clear on your vision and where the company's going with the change, right? It all comes full circle from when we were, little guys and gals, right? So,
but what I like, Rich, and maybe we can get into the model that you sort of have this model in your idea, I think. But one of the things I like about that is that I can be crystal clear in my head about what I'm saying, and I can think I'm saying exactly what I'm thinking, and the words I'm using or the pictures I'm painting are exact representations in the right voice, the right tone, the right frame that is saying what I want to say. And you might see it, hear it, feel it, taste it completely differently. And so there's an element of feedback that you have in your model that is really fantastic. That I love that idea that communication is a two-way, that it's not just an information push. At its best, it's a two-way, give and get, push and pull, receive type thing. So I'll stop and you can.
Well, we're
No, that's really interesting because as I have a marketing background, right? And historically, like traditional marketing has been this push style of marketing, right? Which is, we're just going to tell you what we want you to hear and what we want you to do, right? But that model on a marketing side has changed significantly, where we are now much more conversational, where it's there is a little bit more back and forth. We're not entirely there yet, but social channels, digital, all of that has changed the landscape. Not to mention, how we interact with as people have for eons, or, so marketplaces have been around for a long time.
So Rich, what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that coming from a marketing background, you have noticed that there is a different way to communicate rather than that push, and that modern listeners and communicators have an active approach to that cycle.
Right.
Active listening. Anyone?
Active
Can
listening.
I just say, Cheryl, that was a perfect example. That little clip right there could be its own teaching moment of how to be an active listener.
It's how I roll.
Really, really cool.
Thank you.
It's how you roll. Right. So, yeah. Let's go through that model, and we'll throw this up in the video here, and I'll have a link to it. But so this is not a model I created, by the way. This has been around for a while in a few textbooks. But imagine this. Close your eyes and imagine this. If you don't see it on screen, if you're listening to us in audio, but you have the sender and you have the receiver, right? On the sender side, the sender has a message. This message, it needs to be encoded. In other words, it needs to be put into such a way that it can travel over a channel to be received by the receiver, right? So we have this encoding that could be the words that we put together when we're speaking. That can be the written word. It could be a video. It can be a blog. It could be any of those types of things, right? We have a channel that we're communicating that encoded message across, right? So let's look at the carrier pigeon. Right, we have a message. We encoded this message. We put it on this little guy. Now he has we send him out. He's over a channel, right? In that channel, however, we have interference. We have noise, right? We have things that can happen. We have wind shear. We have hawks. We have whatever it is that, from a internet standpoint, we have internet outages. Even in a crowded room, we have loud noises. So we also have language barriers that are part of that problem, right? Some of that interference. Then on the receiver side, the receiver needs to receive the message. So if the receiver never receives it because of the interference, we have communication issues right off the bat there. But let's just say it's received. The receiver needs to be able to decode it, right? So carrier pigeon comes over, somebody catches him, looks at it, the message, and the message is in code. If we know what that code is, we understand it, and there we go, right? Then we have the feedback loop, right? We need to send even what our thoughts are, or even an acknowledgement that we've received this, right? And so that feedback now becomes a closed system, right? So now the receiver is sending the feedback over the various channels. It could be the same channel, it could be different channels, right? So, it's kind of a simplified version, but it kind of outlines really how complex communication is and why it is such a challenge for us in the workplace.
Thanks, Rich. And not even in the workplace. Just any relationship that you have with anyone, this idea that we can actually understand each other and communicate reasonably sufficiently is fairly impressive, given all those different subtle interactions at each step of the way, and all the potential points of interference, and all the potential for things to get slightly distorted or not come out quite the right way, or not get transmitted quite the right way, or not heard the right way based on how I'm feeling when I encode a message, or how you're feeling when you receive the message. All of these different, it's sort of just amazing that we can interact at all.
It's true. Sure. And then the social aspects, there's that spectrum of formal to informal language, not just language barriers, as you are mentioning, Rich, from culture to culture, but also what is the temperature in the room, who are the people, what is the topic, what is the level of comprehension, what is the system of language that's appropriate in that setting. All of those factors affect that decoding as well, and the sending.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it has always been a challenge. Let me put this into perspective. Like a baby, right? A baby has a need, right? Needs to be fed. Needs to encode that message, cry, right? Needs to send it over. If the parent doesn't understand what that cry is, could be, that the mom or dad can try to, it's baby needs to be changed, whatever. Until they understand, and eventually sometimes they actually get, that's a feeding cry, right? So there's this level of understanding that we can get with some
familiarity.
Familiarity. Thank you very much. Yeah. Where it's a very social thing. Like at some point we can kind of intuitively understand what the other party is trying to convey, right? But we also need to be, mindful about how that receiver is going to do that. And like you said, Cheryl, like different cultures are going to handle that reception in a different way. Your collectivist cultures are going to be very much different than individualist cultures, in a lot of respects.
Right.
Has anyone done any research on or have you been exposed to any research on the way that people are internally wired and how they hear a message, in the sense that someone who's a day trader might see something in the market and think opportunity, whereas the same signal from the market, if someone's more of a CPA type, they might hear risk. And those two are very different perspectives and responses to hearing the same message based on their jobs or their internal personalities or what have you.
And that's specialization, right? And that can go back to traits, that can go back to nature and nurture. When the baby is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the baby has to be fed. The baby needs certain basic needs all the way up to the very apex of that triangle where the trader hears risk or opportunity, right? That's skills, learning, sensitivity, traits. There's a lot that goes into what track you're going to be on when you hear that. Now, if you mean physiologically, I'm not an expert in that, but that nature nurture balance will fine tune a person's sensitivity to different messages.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And if we even look at from a trait standpoint, right? If you look at like the big 5 personality traits, what is that?
Introvert.
Extroversion, conscientiousness. Boy, I should have come prepared with this one.
That'd be a great acronym once we get it, once we remember it.
Right.
What?
What's that?
Oh, I was just going to say, why don't we take a break? We can look up the acronym and come back and acronym.
Let's do that,
people. And we're going to recap our theory.
I love it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some traits and how they can affect our sending and receiving of communication. We'll be right back.
For Fortune 100 companies and small businesses alike, Harborside Strategy helps design and implement customized precision change management initiatives. From new organizational structures to new processes to new systems, we help you clarify the reason and urgency around your change in language that will resonate across your organization. With that clarity and a common purpose, we use the power of stories and blended communication methods to reinforce your goals and keep everyone focused and aligned. All of it tailored to your people, your organization, your needs. Contact Principal Ben Kleinman today to learn more at www.harborsidestrategy.com. Again, that is www.harborsidestrategy.com.
And we're back. So, Ben was asking if there's been any study on how, if somebody receives a message, how the behaviors change. Right? Did I get that right, Ben?
Yeah, how someone's internal behaviors or how someone's internalization, how someone's upbringing. Cheryl referred to it very nicely as sort of nature nurture, how that person is wired to receive and act on things.
Right.
Does that influence how the same signal can be heard very differently by two different people?
Sure.
And so I think that's where we started getting into traits, and there's, of course, a model for that.
Of course, there's a model for that. There's a model for everything.
And an acronym for everything.
That's right. Well, so the big 5, right? Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Opposite of openness would be being I don't want to say closed, but being hesitant to being open to those new experiences. You'll be stubbornness, I guess you would say. Your level of conscientiousness is how much you are thoughtful, right? Versus somebody who is probably a little more self-serving and controlling, right? introversion versus extroversion. Your level of agreeableness is how much compassion and respectfulness you have for somebody else. And then neuroticism, I always found that one interesting. But the opposite of that is emotional stability, right? So, so if we look at that and we just think about that for a second, right? If somebody receives some bit of information, like you were saying, Ben, about a financial situation, one may see this as a potential opportunity. The other may see this as a risk, right? The one who's open to experience, maybe a little more extroverted, and less neurotic, may see this as an opportunity to go after something, but may also not be conscientious or agreeable about whether or not this is a risk. And the other one on the opposite side is probably highly neurotic, not very open, and fairly introverted. So that's going to affect the way that we process information. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And not to flip it too far out of the trading environment, but if you take that to apply it to leadership, and you start to get into that area of back to marketing in a way, Rich, right? So here's a leader who sees a downtrend coming, and they have to find a way to communicate that to their team. Some may frame it as an opportunity, right? Here comes some rough waters. You get a chance to rise to the occasion, right? That's right. Otherwise known as perhaps spin or influence or negotiation, all of those other skills that are not forms of interference, but forms of crafting of the communication. You take the pigeon, back to that, and you sort of make that pigeon look kind of like a rock star when it shows up with bad news. You just say,
yeah, you're coding it.
It's turning little Benny Kleinman into Gene Simmons.
That's right. So, here comes the bird of fortune, and then that leads into a whole nother specific area of communication. And I did talk to you guys before we started the show, but after World War II, the study of propaganda and what is the difference between that influence for malicious intent. And then we've, fast forward all the way up to political messaging and media and influencers now, right? So
sure.
Going back to the question, what colors the interpretation of a message to any one individual, there is a huge section in that question about what is the motivation of the sender too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And oh, go ahead.
Well, Rich, I was going to say you're the marketing expert, but Cheryl, you have a very good point, and I think we either devote it to a separate episode or just sort of tee it up that there's a lot of information and research on persuasive communications that is probably too broad for us to get into for today's episode. Absolutely. But maybe that's something that we, if there's interest, we could talk about that in more detail in the future, to where it's used for good and it's used for our proverbial mustache twirling evil twin.
Right. And besides, we do have to get back to our topic with what is the one thing you can do to be a better communicator. So we're still working up to that for everyone who's still listening.
I hope we didn't lose anybody yet.
I don't know. I think words like media, influencers, active listening, and propaganda should be enough to keep people's interest.
I would think. I mean,
quite a bag.
We still have a huge amount of propaganda used, not just in the political landscape, which we're just Now, with an election year, we're going to be seeing a lot more of that coming from the political side. But we see that on the marketing side of things. We see this in interoffice politics all the time, right? There is a specific agenda. This is what it is that we're going to be doing, right? But from the effectiveness, like you were saying, Cheryl, of like influencers, right? And you have influencers that are kind of obvious of kind of politicizing an audience.
Their
right?
agenda.
But then you have some,
their agenda.
right, yeah. But then you have other influencers that are not, that are a little more. They're really speaking to the audience, and they're influencing people, but they're doing so altruistically, or at least apparently, authentically, right? So I think there is the sense that we may be leaders have an ability to really effectively communicate when they're really considering the audience.
Great
right?
point.
And considering the needs of the audience, and considering all parties, so that's where I'm going to leave it there.
Sure. An effective communicator takes all stakeholders into consideration. Know your audience, right? That is like the number one lesson in speech, presentation skills, all of it, right? Know your audience.
Yep.
For everything, anything that you're communicating.
Yep.
Ah,
so
that's my number one tip. I've already let it slip. That's it.
We haven't even hit the second break.
I'll refine it over time.
That tip. There you go.
Well, you guys still have your tips. So there. Mine is out of the bag.
Out of the bag. Well, that's all right. Let's do this. Let's take another quick break. And when we come back, let's talk about some ways that we can be better communicators. We'll be right back.
Are you struggling with high employee turnover, low morale, or poor communication within your team? Do you find it challenging to foster collaboration and trust among your employees? Do you have resistance to some of the recent changes you've made in your business? You're not alone. According to sources such as Forbes and the Society for Human Resources Management, many business owners face these same challenges. They know that success comes from a strong workplace culture, but they don't always know where to start. If this sounds like you, it's time to take action. Our experienced consultants stand ready to work with you to develop customized solutions. Don't wait any longer. Take our quick culture scorecard today and discover where you can improve. Work Balance Consulting, where workplace culture meets success. Visit our website at www.workbalanceconsulting.com/scorecard and start your journey toward a better workplace today. Again, visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com/scorecard.
And we're back. So Cheryl has already introduced one tip for you to be a better communicator, and refresh us with that wisdom there, Cheryl.
My tip was to be an effective communicator. Know thine audience.
Sage advice.
Prepare
Absolutely.
for those stakeholders that you are addressing, and understand them to the extent you can, so that you will really, really reach them with your message.
Yep.
Whatever you're communicating, whether it's a book, a text, a speech, a lesson,
A song.
skywriting.
We have huge audiences that rally around bands and the message that they put out there. That's all communication too. It comes.
I mean, Will You Marry Me has to be targeted to the right person when you're skywriting. See,
For sure. That could go very wrong.
Could go poorly. Ben, get us back on track. I see you trying.
I'm going to step back for just a moment, because one of the things that I think is super important is if we realize what we were talking about before in this idea of all of these parts of communication that the research has broken down into very discrete components, where you have an idea that you want to send to someone or share with someone. You try to figure out how you want to say it. You say it. It's carried across some sort of communication channel. Someone hears it. Someone tries to decode it. Then they have to internalize it or understand it and internalize it. And there's so many things that can go wrong in all of that to sort of corrupt or displace what you wanted to say in the first place. Yep. And how it's received. And then there's that feedback loop to see, which again can have all of this interference going back. So I might think I'm giving you really helpful feedback, or I might think I'm saying, yeah, so what I just heard was X, and you might hear that in a way that says something completely different than what I was trying to communicate back to you. So there's already this whole feedback loop is just fraught with all sorts of interference potential. And I think that's the thing that maybe as a starting point for me would be something to really think about as a leader. If you're trying to communicate something that's more than just a, hey, buddy, good job. You did a really good job with that presentation. There has to be some understanding, even if you don't walk through every one of those little steps, but you have to understand that there's the potential for so many different points to go just a little bit wrong. And as you add up all those just a little bit wrongs, it becomes like all of a sudden the Titanic is now heading down into South America instead of going up north into the Arctic Circle. And so just being aware of that and being open to the idea that maybe what you're trying to say needs to be refined or repeated in different ways, or it might not be heard the right way that you think is the right way to get it across. All of these things, just you have to be open and have a little bit of humility maybe, and a little bit of intentionality about, I'm going to say it, but say it in lots of different ways, or be open to maybe it didn't come across the right way the first time, and have some grace in how people hear it and respond and all of that. Just knowing that this is such a sort of difficult process, or potentially difficult process, can help you craft a better message and be clearer in what you're trying to say, and be more open to receiving feedback that what you said maybe is being heard differently than what you thought you said.
And sure. Ben, you brought it back so beautifully to the idea of change being, there's resistance to change. Change is difficult to introduce. And I think it was episode 20 when we were telling each of our stories, a single story from our past where it's especially challenging. Your organization that you were working in at the time of that change, the story that you shared with us was that the project went successfully because there was a variety of, there was consistent and constant communication in a variety of formats, considering a variety of audiences. And it's the reason why we always come back to how key communication is. And that's a super granular example that you gave us to counteract exactly what you're talking about. All of those pitfalls along the road of a message. And so in order to be humble, be flexible, be adaptable, and knowing different audiences, you can plan for a variety of formats and modes, even if it's the same message.
Yeah, thank you for recapping that. Since you guys have been a little bit closer to the world of academia than I have recently, is there any training? Do people get training? Do leaders get training in that?
Oh, there's certainly training available. Whether or not companies do train people, or if people are, leaders are self-motivated to go and get that training, or listening to it. Yeah, or taking it seriously if they are doing it, yeah,
once-
right, yeah,
once-
exactly, yeah. The noses and the phones at
Right.
these, training
It-
sessions.
Right.
actively unactive listening, inactive listening. What would be the opposite of active listening, or empathic or emotional like emotional unintelligence, unactive listening? I don't
Well,
know.
there's
Inactive,
there's-
disengaged.
Disengaged. I like it.
disengage,
Sorry, I'm taking a
disengage, and there's also the idea of intentional misinterpretation. I mean, we see this going back to the news and politics. No matter what is said by one side, it will be the most malicious interpretation is likely
Mhm.
more of a higher motivation. And not to go too much into politics, but back to courses and classes, conflict resolution,
Sure.
speaking with an intention,
Sure.
speech skills, again, knowing your audience, doing your research. Like these are skills
yeah.
that can be taught. And there are courses in this when there's a budget and people take the time out to do that.
Right. Or I guess now I'm also thinking about Dale Carnegie and the How to Win Friends and Influence People is a classic
Absolutely.
type of book.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Cheryl, it goes back to what you were saying in terms of spin. And you can have spin for good and spin for evil. And
Right. And
Right.
and if your team is resistant to a change, sometimes it doesn't matter how clear you are with the message, right? There's still going to be, back channeling and, but that
Yeah.
depends on the motivations of your audience. And you can't always know what those are going to be. So that's that feedback loop. And psychological safety, right? I see your lips moving. I know you're talking to us and I know it's important. But if I don't understand it, I may not say I don't if I feel like I will be identified as someone who
Right.
can't listen.
Sure. If there's going to be some negative consequence, I'm not going to participate. Yeah. Before, I know we need to start wrapping up here, like now. But one thing that came to mind while the two of you were talking was how to avoid some of the misinterpretation, or even how we can avoid the problems of transmitting a message. Practice often comes up in coaching, right? When people are coaching, they're told to practice in front of a mirror, go to a peer, do that type of thing, so that and I think having some intentional practice of here's what I'm trying to say, and getting feedback from somebody who can be helpful in helping you to craft that message and how you're going to transmit it can be a tool in our toolbox to be better communicators.
Absolutely. If you have that trust,
I love it.
that the person that you feel comfortable doing that with and that you feel is skilled enough to give you feedback you can use, all of those boxes, if you can check those boxes and find that person. And there's, a lot of stage fright almost with that kind of thing too. And it does take practice, like you're saying, Rich. You just have to.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about my kid he's in a play coming up here, in our tech week. And that's what this whole thing is about, is, putting the show together, but giving themselves feedback and making this feel like we're communicating what we're supposed to the audience, in the way that the audience is going to receive it the way we want them to receive it. So why not put that into practice, in the workplace or in real life, in our everyday lives.
Sure. All the world's a stage.
That's exactly right. All right. Well, let's wrap up this episode. Who's gonna send us off? It ain't me today.
Oh, I think
What are you two?
Cheryl.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Maybe you did both, but this is a huge topic, and maybe we will continue it on our next episode. We'll see. We'll see what we might have left out. And of course, feedback from our audience would help us determine, do we need
So
to
much.
revisit this? We always kind of have communication in our episodes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both. We'll finish with our favorite phrase, make change your friend.
Perfect.
Cheers.
See you all
everyone.
at the next
Thanks.
episode. Take care. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.